I'm Ted Sullivan, a 43-year-old office worker. I've been married to Amy for 7 years. Amy is 13 years younger than me. When we get married, people used to tease me, saying, "Snagged yourself a young bride, huh?" The impact of meeting Amy is something I'll never forget. Back then, I was stuck in a grueling job, worn out both mentally and physically. It was during this time that I came across her artwork at an exhibition showcasing apprentices of a renowned textile artist. Amy's piece was the one that really caught my eye. By chance, I was drawn to that artwork I saw through the window. It was a piece with a pale crimson hue, reminiscent of the morning sunrise. It was a simple dress made from hand-woven fabric. Lost in its beauty, it was Amy who approached me, and I fell for her at first sight. Meeting Amy boosted my motivation at work significantly. It'd be pathetic if I couldn't match her dedication. I kept telling myself, if I couldn't outwalk her, I didn't deserve to propose marriage. My performance at work soared, and once I finally gained some self-confidence, I proposed marriage to her. Her response was, "I've been waiting for you to ask." I love my job. It gives me a sense of self-worth. But I love Amy, my wife, even more than that. The reason I finish my tasks quickly is because I don't want to stay late at work. Every second counts. I just want to rush home and be with Amy. That's the spirit I bring to my work. However, there were those who weren't fond of my approach. I initially brushed them off as mere jealous folks, but it seems I might have underestimated them. One of them is Mr. Jenkins, my immediate supervisor. Apparently, as my performance started getting rave reviews, he felt threatened by me. The issue at hand was a simple one. There was a discrepancy in the number of orders, and Mr. Jenkins began to make a fuss about it. My name was on the orders, but I had no recollection of making such a mistake. Lost and confused, I couldn't fathom what was happening. You ramp things up without any overtime, and that's why you make such basic mistakes. He yelled at me, and I had no way to counter his claims, especially since I had never been involved in this task. Mr. Jenkins reported my supposed sloppiness to the higher-ups, claiming I was error-prone as I never double-checked anything. Furthermore, he alleged that my current mistake had caused a significant loss to the company, and while he'd usually cover for such things, this time he couldn't back me up. Some colleagues tried to defend me, but after seeing me getting sidelined, they became silent, out of fear that they too might face repercussions if they supported me. I can't blame them for not standing up for me. Because if my colleague really took the fall for me and got demoted, I'd feel terrible for him and his family. I decided to accept the demotion. My main concern is Amy. With the demotion, my salary will drop. What would I do if she mentioned divorce? That's all I could think about. I'm sorry, I got demoted. The moment I got home, I apologized to Amy. She blinked in surprise twice. I explained that the new position was in a branch near the mountains, a relaxed sort of place. Of course, I also admitted that my pay would be reduced. I held my breath, waiting for Amy's reaction. "Well, sounds like a place with fresh air. That's nice," Amy said, laughing. I felt a bit blindsided. I thought she'd be a bit upset or sad, but Amy just laughed as if it was no big deal. "I'm sorry. I messed up." I started to speak softer, feeling more guilty. Amy gently took my left hand and peered into it. Then, looking up at me with an amused look, she said in a fortune-teller-like tone, "Your fate line is thick and long." Huh? A thick and long fate line on the palm means good luck in work. That's why no one else would do. At Amy's words, I felt so relieved I was on the verge of tears. She hadn't given up on me. "You'll come with me to the new place, right?" I held Amy's hand with both of mine and looked deeply into her eyes. She stared straight back at me. "Take care, I'll be waiting here." With her unwavering gaze, I felt my heart sink. Imagining myself returning to an empty apartment without Amy waiting was crushing. So, work hard and come back soon. With Amy's words of encouragement, I accepted my transfer to the remote branch with a heavy heart. "We thought you'd bring your wife, so we prepared a family apartment for you," the branch manager said, rubbing salt into the wound. "I'm sorry," I replied meekly. The branch I was transferred to was infamous for something. It was the branch where all the problematic employees were rumored to be sent. Actually, there are those who lost to office politics or, like me, were set up by someone and got demoted. The branch is filled with people who have a bit of a history. Because of that, there's a universal lack of motivation towards work. However, many are highly competent, so when there is work, it gets done at an astonishing speed. Then, we have too much time on our hands again. Within the branch, this vicious cycle was rampant. I too was momentarily swept up in this atmosphere, but I desperately wanted to get back to Amy as soon as possible. The only way to do that was to improve my own reputation. But there isn't even that kind of opportunity in this branch. In this branch, there's only one person struggling like I am. That's Jessica Smith, who handles the same duties as me. Back when we were at the headquarters, she was the star of the CEO's office and garnered a lot of attention. Before I knew it, she had been transferred to this branch. She's younger than me, but her rank is higher. Unlike me, she doesn't give in to negativity. She desperately searches for work and gets it done. She also gives regular presentations to the headquarters, trying hard to uplift our branch. There's no point in moping around. I can't rest until I get back at the person who set me up. She'd say, working diligently. She clearly wasn't planning to end things here. Interestingly, the atmosphere within the branch started to change. Colleagues would give advice or help with problems Jessica and I couldn't solve. Motivation began to spread like wildfire. Before we knew it, many of our branch's proposals were being adopted by the headquarters. Our branch was becoming something that couldn't be ignored. When I realized this, I felt confident we could do it. The branch's performance improved rapidly, even surpassing the same department at headquarters. Even friends from headquarters would call and jokingly say, "Go easy on us." Then one day, the branch manager got a call from headquarters. Apparently, it was a direct call from the CEO. Wiping sweat from his brow, the branch manager kept saying, "Yes, yes." From his reactions, it seemed he was given a challenging task. After hanging up, he let out a long sigh. Everyone gathered around his desk. "Boss, what did the CEO say?" The task given by the CEO was completely unrelated to our usual business. We were asked to guide the daughter of a major client. That was the CEO's instruction. Sure, our branch is located near the mountains in a place brimming with nature, somewhat like Colorado. But there aren't any tourist spots, maybe just rivers and mountains. The company president's daughter is 14 years old, apparently a challenging age to handle. On top of that, there are rising concerns about her father's remarriage, and she's genuinely upset. The request was to somehow melt her hardened heart. Why was this assigned to our branch? Such a troublesome task. Saying this much aloud, I convince myself, it's because it's a hassle that it got passed to us. The president's daughter will return from the UK in a week. We need to think of how to entertain her by then. She's apparently visiting for 2 nights and 3 days. From that day, we were swamped, preparing the lodge for her stay, discussing the meals, secretly researching what she's interested in and planning the hospitality accordingly. Oh, she's interested in textile arts. She seems interested in traditional crafts, and there was a report that she particularly likes textile arts. Textile arts. She's interested in something so intricate. Do we have any contacts? Jessica said this while biting her nails. I've noticed it's a habit of hers when she's stressed. We have a textile artist in our contacts. Jessica immediately showed interest in my words. Really? Who? Can they come? Grasping at straws, Jessica looked to me and I replied confidently. Of course, it's my pride and joy, my wife. It's well known in the branch that I'm a devoted husband, but nobody knew she's a textile artist. I was convinced we'd excel in this task. The company president's daughter, Sarah, visited this place. She had pale skin, long chestnut hair. Her fingers looked like they'd never done a day's hard work, and she seemed quite tense. Responding to the branch manager's greetings with a nod, she asks her luggage to be taken to the lodge. Thank you for taking care of me. My father has caused you some trouble. Her politeness took me aback. It seems, for now, her only enemy is her father. Let me guide you. I'm Ted Sullivan. Nice to meet you. This is Jessica. If you have any concerns, please consult her. I introduce myself and Jessica. The two of us are in charge of her care. On the first day, we briefly toured the mountains. She seemed to enjoy dipping her feet in the river, which was a relief for us. Saying she's a bit tired, she returned to the lodge and seemed to read a book till evening. Nice to meet you. I'm Amy Sullivan. Sarah, who was reading, was approached by Amy. I didn't realize Amy had arrived, which made me a bit nervous. After all, I hadn't told Amy anything about Sarah. All I'd said was that Sarah was interested in textile arts. I hadn't explained the sensitive issues she's dealing with yet. Sullivan. Right on. I'm his wife. You're into textile arts. Pointing at me and introducing herself as my wife, she immediately gets to the point. Upon hearing about textile arts, Sarah looked delighted and closed her book. From there, the two of them seemed to be talking about textile arts and traditional crafts for over an hour. Sarah is well versed in the jargon and seemed to fully grasp Amy's explanations. Topics on textile arts, like batik and tie-dye, are endless. Amy makes a living folding fabric dyed with natural dyes. She dyes all the threads herself. Sometimes you get unexpected colors. It's quite magical. Showing the dyed threads, Amy spoke. It seemed the two got along pretty well. Jessica and I watched them. That's your wife. Yes. Isn't she wonderful? And it's not just about her looks. I admire the way Amy lives her life. I've seen her locked in her workshop, lamenting her own technical shortcomings, sometimes hysterically. She sits in front of the loom with dedication, manipulating the threads as if conversing with them. What comes out isn't just a pattern. It's a scene that mesmerizes me. On my days off, I loved reading to the sound of Amy working her loom. You're smitten, aren't you? Jessica said, half in disbelief, half enviously, and then chuckled. The next day, we visited a workshop of one of Amy's friends nearby. Sarah was excited to see an actual workshop that specialized in natural dyeing. Even at breakfast, she'd ask, "Where's Amy?" She seemed quite taken with Amy. Amy went for a walk early this morning. Whenever we travel, she always goes for a morning walk, and she leaves me behind. She prefers to be alone. Telling her this, I felt a rush of emotions from that moment. By the end, I seemed a bit sulky, which made Sarah stifle a laugh. Upon arriving at the workshop, Sarah's eyes sparkled. A man who is Amy's senior is the owner of this workshop. He explained every step of the process to Sarah. Amy watched from a distance. I realized she was holding back, not interrupting while the workshop owner was explaining. Sarah seems brighter now. Thank you. I whispered this standing next to Amy. You're welcome. But she's hiding something. I told Amy about the issues Sarah was facing. Amy furrowed her brow and listened intently to my story. I was well aware that it wasn't pleasant news for her either. Amy's relationship with her dad was terrible. She didn't even invite him to her wedding. I heard that when Amy was little, her dad ran off with a younger woman. The only time they met again was right after Amy's mom passed away from an illness. He came back during the funeral with a different woman, not the one he ran off with. And he had said, "Meet your new mom. Aren't you happy?" With a big smile on his face. Amy ran to her grandparents' house in distress. That's where she first encountered a loom. She'd lock herself in the workshop and weave by herself. For Amy, mentioning her dad was a touchy subject. So, I thought Amy would be the right person to comfort Sarah. There was a fear that she might feel used. But I decided to trust Amy. "It's your turn now," said the senior of the workshop to Amy. He called her by a nickname she had during her college days. I felt a twinge of jealousy. They had been friends since college. He knew a side of Amy I didn't. "Sarah, would you like to try weaving over there?" In a specialized dye workshop, there was an old loom. Amy seated Sarah in front of it. "May I touch it?" Sarah looked up at Amy and asked. Of course. Now it was Amy's turn. She carefully showed Sarah how to thread and weave, step by step. I decided it was best to leave them alone. All you could hear was the sound of the loom. I think they worked for about 2 hours. The sound of the loom stopped, and Sarah came out of the workshop with a refreshed look. I could see a significant change in her demeanor from when we first met. "Thank you so much for everything," Sarah said, bowing slightly. Seeing her smile confirmed to me that our plan had worked. The next day, Sarah went back home. She said there would be her father's new wife waiting. "I hope Sarah is all right," I murmured as I watched her car drive away. "She's okay," Amy said. "What happened? Did you do something?" In response to my question, Amy says, "That's a secret. I was summoned from the headquarters 2 days after Sarah returned. Jessica and I, along with the branch manager, head to the main office in New York. As soon as we arrived at the headquarters, we were told to go to the CEO's office. Being summoned by the CEO himself, Jessica and I exchanged glances. In the CEO's office was the manager, Mr. Jenkins, who had demoted me. Moreover, the president of a business partner was there, who is Sarah's father. I'm tense, not knowing whether it's praise or a scolding. Jessica's hand is shaking slightly. She's probably nervous too, but his gaze is fixed on Mr. Jenkins, who's standing next to the CEO, not on the CEO himself. Moreover, his eyes are clearly filled with anger, not fear. "You've come a long way. Thanks for that." The CEO starts with this. "It turns out the reason we were called was about Sarah. To put it simply, it wasn't a scolding." During the CEO's speech, Sarah's father stood up and shook the branch manager's hand, expressing his gratitude multiple times. Apparently, Sarah gave permission to remarry. Moreover, it seemed that the rift between the father and daughter had mended, and their relationship was likely on the mend. They thanked us so many times, saying it was because of us, to the point where it made us feel embarrassed. The CEO, having witnessed this, was very pleased. He heaped praise on our work. He even said he appreciated the recent performance of our branch. It was touching. Now, on to the main topic. "Jessica, do you have something to say?" Jessica, who originally worked in the secretary's office, and the CEO go way back, she began to speak with determination. "I believe it was a mistake for you to transfer me. I'd like to request an inquiry from Mr. Jenkins here." With that, Jessica glared at Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins raised his voice, saying, "That's water under the bridge, isn't it? Think about it. I'm quite picky. Do you think Mr. Jenkins has the kind of charm that I would be tempted by? That's a misunderstanding at best." Come to think of it, there were rumors that Jessica was stalking Mr. Jenkins. But he is clearly married. It seems the reason Jessica was demoted was somewhere around there. Upon hearing Jessica's words, the CEO burst into laughter, and Mr. Jenkins was at a loss for words. The branch manager was trying his best not to laugh. After a good laugh, the CEO placed a pile of documents on the table. This is a report based on interviews with employees. After thorough scrutiny, it's clear that all the reasons for your demotions were fabricated by Mr. Jenkins here. Upon hearing those words, Mr. Jenkins's face turned pale. I always thought the truth would come out eventually, but I didn't expect it to be at this moment. The CEO announced he's demoting Mr. Jenkins and transferring him to a different department. He told us we should return to the headquarters. It seems Jessica will be making a comeback to the secretary's office. She happily said thank you and bowed to the CEO. As for me, I was feeling a bit uneasy. I guess it's probably because of the great success about Sarah. I think this is a reward. Normally, something like what happened with Mr. Jenkins would have been ignored, and the one who persuaded Sarah's stubborn heart was. This time, the credit goes to my wife. I want to return to the headquarters with pride when I achieve something on my own. Amy would have probably laughed and said, "That's just putting on a brave face." But I think she probably likes that about me. The CEO exclaimed, "I love it," and stood up. Jessica looked at me with an expression that seemed like she felt guilty about being the only one returning to the headquarters. I'm still working hard at the branch office. Later, Sarah revisited the branch office and shared the whole story with me. Amy said that when Sarah was weaving with the loom, Amy told her that weaving multiple threads together is similar to life, and that dyeing with natural dyes doesn't always go as planned. In those moments, it's good to adjust yourself to the situation. I always tell myself during those times, that's just how it is. Trying to see the brighter side of things makes life more enjoyable. Sarah's life doesn't have to be like her father's. She told me she realized her stubbornness after hearing Amy's words. The look on my dad's face when I agreed to his remarry was something I had never seen before. She laughed as she remembered and detailed the story to me. She seemed free from any doubts or reservations, and I felt relieved. "You didn't return to the headquarters, Ted." At Sarah's words, I was at a loss for words. I did say that to the CEO back then, but I regretted it deeply afterward. I guess I was trying too hard to be cool. With a sigh, my true feelings slipped out, and Sarah burst into laughter. "My name is Mike. I work in sales for a clothing company. My performance is about average, earning a decent salary. My life will always be the same. And I believe the same for today. Delivery for you." That day, I was delivering items like bandages and disinfectants to a small orthopedic clinic. The receptionist was supposed to come and get them, so I just left the big cardboard box at the front desk and planned to head out. Ouch! I accidentally let the box slip from my grasp, dropping it right on my left toe, and the pain was immediate. Though the box was heavy, luckily, nothing fragile was inside. I first checked the products for damage, but then... I tried to stand, but couldn't. The pain was too intense. Seeing this whole incident, the receptionist looked concerned. "Are you okay?" "Just for my pride," I replied. "I'm fine." In which I honestly wasn't. Removing my sock, my toe was already red, and I figured it'll bruise horribly over time. I thought of icing it, but could barely move without limping. "Need help?" The receptionist had alerted a doctor. The clinic was nearly empty as the consultation hours were almost over. The doctor, who was a lady, looked worriedly at me. "This might be fractured. Let's get an X-ray. Fill out this form and hand over your health insurance card." Her efficiency was assuring. The pain and the possibility of a fracture scared me, so I complied. Turns out, it wasn't broken but had a minor crack. A moment's inattention can lead to lasting pain, as they say. She prescribed painkillers and a few follow-up visits. I was pretty bummed. But this is how I met my wife, Arya. The circumstances of our meeting were embarrassing for me, but Arya is truly a wonderful person. Beautiful, kind, and a doctor. Yet, she's sensitive, gentle, and sentimental at times. I fell for Arya during my regular clinic visits. Soon after, we began dating and eventually got married. Whether it was our family meeting, or our wedding, or even on our regular dates, her emotional side often showed. People always assume female doctors are strict, but you never did. That's what made me happy. Arya once said. Sure, with her long hair and piercing eyes, she might seem stern. And indeed, during work, she is a strict person. But work and personal life are separate. Our life under the same roof had its ups and downs, but overall, we had a good marital bond. However, in our 5th year of marriage, things took a turn. The trigger was the death of Arya's father. He was already an elderly, and Arya had somewhat braced herself for this. After getting the call, Arya and I headed to her parents' house. Arya's family home is so far away that we have to take a plane. While on the plane, I reminisced about my father-in-law. Arya's dad came from a long line of doctors, and I remembered that he had his own privately run hospital. I'm not very familiar with all these things. Well, this is because Arya doesn't like talking about her father. But I know he was a very strict man. When we get married, I was suggested, or rather, ordered by my company to see if we could make a business deal with him. When I approached my father-in-law about it, he got pretty mad at me. Private practices like ours value networking. Just because you're married to my daughter doesn't mean you can barge in on that. Thankfully, Arya explained to him that I was forced into it by my company, which cleared up the misunderstanding. She said he's old-fashioned, and that's why he values relationships. That's probably why he was able to run his clinic for so many years. But all things must come to an end. When we arrived at Arya's family home, we prepared for the funeral. The funeral progressed without any issues, and soon we were left to head back. But then, I was suddenly called out by Arya. "What's the matter all of a sudden?" "Well, they just unsealed my father's last will and testament," Arya explained, looking down. It seems her father had considerable assets and named Arya as the sole beneficiary. It's not surprising given Arya's an only child. However, the problem was that the inheritance included her father's clinic. Before, my father told me I couldn't inherit his clinic because he thought I wasn't ready or capable enough, and that was why it was hard for me to talk about my family. The reason Arya works at another hospital and didn't take over her family's practice was not just because she couldn't, but she wanted to earn her father's approval. Tears streamed down Arya's face. I thought, no matter what I did, he'd never recognize me, but in his will, he left the clinic to me. He said, "It's up to you now. I want to look after the clinic." Those words weighed heavy on my heart. I knew she wanted her father's approval, but commuting from our current home to Arya's family house was impossible. If Arya took over the clinic, we'd have to move, and I'd have to quit my job. "I understand how you feel, Arya, but I can't give you an answer right now. I have my job and built my own networks back there. It won't be easy just to say I quit and expect everything to be fine. Moving to a place where I don't know anyone, finding a new job, and living with my mother-in-law who's now all alone, made it hard for me to respond immediately. After all, my mother-in-law is also at the point in her life that will soon require some care. It was a lot to consider, and honestly, I hoped Arya wouldn't take over the clinic. But at the same time, if it was for Arya, I also wanted to support her decision. What? Me? A department manager? The next day, as I was heading to work as usual, I was stopped by my boss. Apparently, he had recommended me for a department manager position. But I haven't produced any exceptional results. True, your performance is average, but your retention rate for new clients is the best. This means you consistently bring in profit. I've never been interested in promotions, so I didn't compare my results with my peers or seniors. It turns out those with impressive numbers to have many new clients, but not many of them keep repeating. They all seem to have the plan, throw enough mud at the wall and some of it will stick. While I have fewer new clients, almost all of them become repeat customers. And this was the reason for my promotion. I was overjoyed. I might not be interested in climbing the ladder, but that doesn't mean I lack the desire to seize the opportunities in front of me. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely excited about a job opportunity. I bet that's how Arya felt too. I couldn't let my selfishness ruin Arya's career. So, during my break, I called Arya and discussed the promotion. "Sorry, honestly, I can't move there. I talked to the boss, and there's no branch there. If I transfer, the promotion might be off the table." "Well, if that's the case, it can't be helped." After discussing, we decided to prioritize our careers. Essentially, we chose to go our separate ways. Of course, I love Arya dearly. But this isn't like a temporary work assignment. We'd be working in different places without any plans to return. Carrying on a marriage in such conditions would be pointless. So, we decided to divorce, but there are no regrets since it was a mutual decision out of respect for each other. Fast forward 20 years. In that time, I went from a regular employee to a supervisor and then to a department head. Being single does feel lonely sometimes, but without a family to worry about, I could immerse myself fully in my work. Having my first team and being in a leadership role was thrilling and made work so much fun. Of course, Arya and I still keep in touch. Once a month or once every few months. We chat about work and life updates, so we've managed to maintain a good friendship. I thought it would always be like this. But until... Breaking news, there was a significant earthquake just a moment ago. While having lunch at a burger shop, my eyes were glued to the TV setup in the place. Apparently, there had been a massive earthquake, equivalent to magnitude 7. The news quickly reported on the areas that felt the most shock, and Arya's town, where her hospital was located, was one of the hardest hit. Arya. I tried calling her immediately, but didn't get an answer. No matter how many times I dialed, there was no answer. Although I did go back to work temporarily, I was too distracted to do anything. Sneaking a peek online, I found some helicopter footages of the affected areas. Arya's region was severely damaged. I rushed to inform my workplace and managed to get a week off. Thankfully, I had a great team who understood and supported my decision. I headed straight for Arya's place. It took a while, but I finally made it to her hospital. But no, this can't be. Arya's hospital was completely destroyed. The building that once stood there was gone. Overwhelmed, I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. Memories of Arya flooded back, and I couldn't help but scream out in despair. If I kept Arya by my side, would things have been different? If we had moved here together, could I have protected her? Endless what-ifs consumed me. But no matter how much I cried, Arya was gone. Mike. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed, and I turned around. Arya was looking at me, looking absolutely worn out. It's not a mistake, Arya is definitely there. I was so overwhelmed with joy that I stood up. Arya, Arya, oh thank goodness. I ran towards her. Although Arya looked ragged, she didn't seem to have any major injuries. Why are you here? I flew over here out of worry. Saw the news about this area on TV, but when I arrived, the hospital was. Saying that, Arya began explaining, looking sad. On the day of the earthquake, Arya had been visiting her mother's and father's graves. Her mother had passed away the previous year, and it wasn't even the anniversary of her death. But Arya continued, "You might find it strange, but I just felt the need to see my parents' faces. Now that I think about it, maybe they were calling out to me." Apparently, Arya was caught in the disaster while visiting the graves and luckily escaped unharmed. However, with so many injured, the disaster-stricken area was chaotic. That's when Arya, an orthopedic surgeon, headed to a large hospital to help. It's not settled yet, but volunteers have been coming to help. I also came to check on my home. Arya looked sadly at the hospital that had collapsed. All the effort I put in after taking over from my father, it's all gone now. Seeing Arya with a face of despair, I tightly hugged her. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there for you during these tough times." "You don't have to say that. At the end you came to see me, didn't you?" As Arya said that, a tear trickled down her face. I faced her. "I'm so grateful that you're alive. I thought I'd never see you again, and I cried for the first time in a long time." "Haha, I'm glad your tears are still doing its job. Mine, on the other hand, feels like it's completely drained." Arya wiped away my tears. In the past, I was the one wiping away Arya's tears. How the tables have turned. Looking at Arya again, I saw her face drained and weary. Of course, she had lost everything she had built up till now. We'd have to think about the future. I knew that such matters should be approached rationally so that both of us would be satisfied, but at that time, I was too overjoyed by the fact that Arya was alive and couldn't stay calm. "Arya, how about coming back to me?" I'm not forcing you, but I regretted it so much earlier. I should have been with you. I was filled with so much regret. That's how much you mean to me. I don't want to feel that way ever again." Saying that, Arya responded, "Yes, I also want to be by your side again. You came to save me when I was all alone. I don't want you to feel lonely either." And so, Ari and I decided to get back together. But that doesn't mean we can just start afresh immediately. With Arya's family home destroyed by the disaster and many still injured, the presence of a doctor is crucial. I'll contact you once things settle down. Got it, I'll prepare on my end too. And so, we separated again, promising to reunite. 1 year later. I never imagined I'd come back here, and I certainly didn't think I'd be able to start my own clinic. Ari returned to me and even started her own clinic. The name was carried over from her father's hospital. In her heart, it might have felt more like a relocation. By the way, the startup funds came from my early retirement package. Actually, the company's performance had been poor for the past few years, and they were looking for early retirees. I was pondering what to do, but with an added bonus to the severance package, I decided to use that money to build Arya's clinic. So, this clinic is co-owned by both Arya and me. But all I could do was procure necessary equipment and some basic clerical work. Also, using the connections I had from my job, I managed to recruit some clerks and nurses. According to Arya, having been away from this land for so long, your connections really helped. There aren't many orthopedic clinics around here, and it quickly became popular among the elderly. It's thanks to you that I could start over. Truly, thank you. Thank you for being by my side. You never know what life will throw at you. But even if I'm told my life ends tomorrow, I want to be next to the one I love. I don't want to have regrets like before. Even though we are just an old couple, you can always restart your life anytime. I want to keep walking along with Arya so that when we look back, we can say it was a good life. Unexpected encounters and, well, unexpected side of people's character. I've always had a soft spot for that kind of thing. From the moment I met my college student girlfriend, I was completely smitten by the contrast in her personality. My name is Mike. I'm 30 and work in sales for a real estate company. I reckon I'm pretty average, like anyone you'd meet. If I have one thing to boast about, it's that I apparently have a knack for sales. I'm not exactly the motivated type, but for some reason, I've always been at the top of the sales charts since I joined. Getting big deals is what I'm known for in the office. I'm not particularly passionate about my job, and to be frank, I'm just working to eat. When I was job hunting, I was already determined to go with the first company that gave me an offer. And it happened to be this real estate agency. So when they try to ask me about my company spirit, I can't really answer it. Tonight, I'm sipping on some liquor that I don't even like, listening to my boss about his company pride. It's one of those typical corporate dinners, entertaining the bigwigs who were signing a huge deal with tomorrow. I was annoyed and wondered, why not just drink after we seal the deal? Inside, I'm seething, but on the outside, I'm all smiles. Guess you could say that's my special skill. By the time my boss was guiding the client into a taxi, saying hope all goes well tomorrow, I was wiped out. And now, I've got to hail a taxi for my own boss. What a pain. As I finally get a taxi, I stuff my boss inside and shut the door hard. He tells me, don't be late tomorrow. He's my direct supervisor, but he's not interested in the work's details. He just wants the credit and can't handle a deal on his own. Tomorrow's a competitive presentation, with a lot of rivals showing up. Feels more like I'm being used than relied on. Recently, I've come to realize that. I heave a sigh of relief as the taxi with my boss disappears from sight. I think of heading straight home and going to sleep, and I start heading to the nearest subway station. Despite it being a weekday, there's quite a crowd, and I weave through, trying not to bump into drunk folks. Fed up with the crowd, I opt for a less populated route, but that choice lands me in trouble. Someone help. Let go of me. I hear a young woman's plea for help in a dark alley. I instinctively turn towards the voice. I see a small-sized woman with glasses and a man who looks like a playboy, having some sort of argument. The guy is pulling the woman by the wrist, dragging her towards an exit where a white van with its sliding door open awaits, likely his buddies inside. This looks like some crime scene for sure. I think about it, but honestly, I'm not keen on getting involved. As I'm deciding whether to walk away or intervene, I lock eyes with the distressed woman. The desperation in her gaze behind those glasses holds me. Without thinking, I find myself stepping between the man and her. I must have moved faster than I ever believed I could. Before I could think, my body just moved on its own. I guess there was something captivating in her eyes. Can't you see she's not into it? And are those guys your pals? This looks like a kidnapping. Isn't this a crime? My words seem to unnerve the guy, and he lets go of her arm. Sheltering her behind me, I tell the guy, just give up. To be honest, fighting isn't my strong suit. I really don't like confrontations or complications. Yet here I am, stirred into action by the intensity of her gaze. Back off, old man, or you'll get hurt. A guy spouting off words like some hoodlum on the street. Looking closer, he seemed like a college student. Hey, are these folks your friends? I turned and asked the girl. I've seen him around campus, but I have no association with him. She responded firmly. The guy momentarily looked hurt by her words. A tussle between me and him continued with shouts of "let go" and "back off." Soon, the distant sound of police sirens grew closer. Probably, a passerby had seen the incident and called the police. Hearing the sirens, the guy clicked his tongue in annoyance. Just when I thought it was over, a heavy punch came flying at me with incredible force. I blacked out as I was slammed against a wall. The last thing I remember was that moment. When I woke up, I found myself in an unfamiliar room. The sunlight coming through the curtains. I felt a pain on my cheek, but my back was in even more pain. It seemed like I was on the second floor, with the distant sound of machinery coming from below. I recognized the nostalgic scent in the air. It was the smell of ink. Rising from the bed I'd been laid on, I checked my sore back. It appeared I had some scrapes. An old-fashioned clock on the wall showed it was 2 p.m. Oddly, I didn't feel panicky or desperate even though I was absent from work and had an important meeting that day. I absent-mindedly wondered who had taken over the crucial deal I was supposed to handle, but I quickly gave up on the thought. My cell phone, which was by the pillow, had a broken screen and seemed to be non-functional, probably from when I fell. Inadvertently, I had become that guy who loses contact on such an important day. My boss must be in a real panic. I said a silent sorry in my head for a moment and then let the thought go. I walked down the stairs, drawn to the sound of machinery. I found what seemed like a living area above a workspace. Judging by the number of dishes in the kitchen, I guessed maybe 2 people live here. Yet, I had no idea where I was. In front of me, there was a large machine with metal plates lined against the wall. I then guessed it's an old-fashioned letterpress printing shop, something I'd seen in books. Beside the machine, a tall man, wearing an apron made of sailcloth, was working. "Excuse me." I spoke hesitantly. He looked up, recognizing me, and gave a warm smile. "Ah, you're awake. You had quite a night. How you tried to help Valerie but ended up getting the worst of it," he remarked. He introduced himself as the older brother of Valerie, the college girl I had tried to help the previous night. Apparently, after I passed out, Valerie had dragged me to this place. That explained the scrapes on my back. He added with a slightly apologetic grin, "We probably should have called an ambulance." "Hey, can I borrow your phone? I need to call my office. I've missed work without notice." He casually tossed me his cell phone. The unlock screen displayed a snapshot of him and Valerie laughing together. They seemed close. The response I got after calling my workplace was a series of angry shouts. At some point, I felt like this is something I can't handle on my own, so I switched to speakerphone, letting the guy hear such a call. The man, who was a letterpress craftsman, introduced himself as Bob. To begin with, I was told to show up, and I replied yes, then hung up the call. Bob said, "That's impressive." Well, it was a big job after all. What kind of job allows you to get verbally abused? Doesn't make sense, he said, and then went back to his work. I did think he had a point. "So, you got fired." He operated the printing press handle with a loud clang. "Probably a demotion. It's such a pain." Regardless of arriving early at the office, the situation wouldn't get better. That thought made me reluctant to even go to work. After finishing his work, Bob invited me upstairs saying, "Let's grab some lunch." "Hey, is that guy all right? Still unconscious?" Then, a college girl from last night, with plastic bags from a drugstore in both hands, kicked the entrance door open. She probably had to kick it since her hands were full, but she came in quite energetically. "Hey, welcome back. This guy here is either getting fired or demoted because of you." Bob said that with a smirk, and his sister, Valerie, looked pale and dropped the bag she was holding. Then she glared at me. I was taken aback by her intense stare and straightened up, staring back. "I got it. I'll take responsibility. I'll take care of you. Don't worry." Valerie seemed to have a peculiar way of thinking. Bob was laughing his heart out. In the end, I reached the office just before closing time. As soon as I placed my bag on my desk, I was called into the boss's office. Inside, the supervisor, manager, and the CEO were all present. All of them frowned and glared at me. "Because of you, everything's been ruined. Do you realize the loss you've caused the company?" the CEO said in a restrained, angry voice. Both the manager and supervisor nodded in agreement. They probably didn't prepare or go through the documents that would have allowed them to handle the situation without me. They clearly wanted to put all the blame on me. Then the CEO handed me a transfer order. "You're being transferred." I was being sent to a quiet branch office, where only unimportant tasks are handled. "Oh, never mind the transfer. Please accept this instead." I quickly pulled out my resignation letter, which I had kept in my suit's inner pocket, and handed it to the CEO. It was something I had written at that printing shop. The CEO and the manager's faces turned pale when they saw it. There was a commotion in the sales department as their top salesman, me, said he would quit. It seems they planned to demote me temporarily and bring me back to the headquarters once everything's settled. My sudden decision to quit left them scrambling. "Well then, I'll be going. Thank you for everything." As I bowed slightly and tried to leave the CEO's office, the CEO shouted, "Hold him back." The supervisor rushed to grab my arm. Leading to a minor scuffle, I was getting really fed up. During the struggle, a small message card fell from my pocket. It was made at the printing shop. As they taught me about the printing process, they made a business card-size message card for me. Embossed with the unique impression of letterpress printing, it read, "I'll take responsibility, Valerie." Looking at the card, a smile crept on my face. "What do you plan on doing after leaving the company? You think other companies will match your current salary?" At the CEO's angered voice, I turned back and gave a bright smile. The sight of my smile left the CEO slightly taken aback. "I think I've secured a permanent job, so I'm good." I felt incredibly refreshed as I stepped out of the boss's office with those words. The next day, I visited the Taggart letterpress printing owned by those siblings. "Please take responsibility," I declared. Valerie, rushing out from the back of the workshop, greeted me with a salute, saying, "Understood." Bob seemed a bit hesitant, but he hired me as a part-timer, and soon I officially joined the printing crew. Bob had an artisan spirit and was a bit quirky. Yet, he's a good guy. You can tell he really cares about his sister, Valerie. Valerie is an unusually conservative college girl for these days. She doesn't wear makeup and has thick glasses, giving her a plain look. But as I worked with her, she surprised me. Once, when ink splattered on her glasses and she couldn't see, we all laughed at her, but when she took off her glasses, I was astonished. Her beautiful almond-shaped eyes were a bright hazel, framed by long lashes. "Do you really have to laugh that much?" she pouted. Her cheeks turned peachy, and she looked simply delightful. Lost in admiration, Bob whispered to me, "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Without realizing, I nodded in agreement, and then felt a strong thud on my back. All the folks in our family are stunning. Seeing Bob smirk, I couldn't help but feel a bit embarrassed. It felt embarrassing, especially since my gaze towards Valerie had clearly changed since she took off her glasses. It was obvious that he had noticed, and it was embarrassing. Then, an incident made me realize the truth of Bob's words. In the evening, Valerie returned from college, holding large paper bags in both hands. "It's my Halloween costume, for a college event," she said. When she returned after changing in her room, I was stunned. Is it weird?" she asked. There she stood, wearing a mini bright red Chinese dress. Her usually hidden legs caught my attention. "Oh, are you interested in outfits like this?" I was about to respond, but felt a pain at the back of my head. Turning around, I found Bob holding a rolled-up magazine. The likely culprit of my sudden headache. "Valerie, it doesn't suit you much. Let's buy another one together later," Bob said, shielding my eyes and speaking gently to his sister. I murmured under my breath, "Protective brother." Of course, the next moment, I felt another thud on my head. "Oh right, sorry, I didn't mean to show something so awkward." Valerie, blushing furiously, dashed to her room. Deep down, I wished I could have seen more. "You're a fast learner, aren't you, Mike?" Valerie commented as we both sat at the workbench, refining imported zinc plates. I'd often find myself admiring her hands even during work. Her delicate fingers meticulously working on the plates looked almost sacred and beautiful. If she didn't wear her glasses, many more would notice her charm. I've always been good with my hands. Even now, Valerie says, "I'll take responsibility," with such sincerity. Bob would just laugh, and at first, I didn't take her seriously. But as the days went by, I realized something. She genuinely wanted to take responsibility. She's sincere, a bit clumsy, and slightly out of touch with the world. But all these traits made me fall for her, without even realizing it. One day, as the three of us were having lunch as usual, there was a feature on historical buildings in downtown New York on TV. I have a passion for historic buildings, and my only hobby on my days off is walking around to see them. As I started explaining the buildings shown on screen to the other two, Valerie leaned in to look me into my face. What's up? Sorry, was I being too loud?" I thought I might have been over-talking, and I apologized to Valerie. She shook her head and stood up, saying, "No, that's not it. Hey, what do you really want to do, Mike? Are you staying here just because I said I'd take responsibility?" Confronted by her intense gaze, I couldn't answer immediately. I thought to myself that I shouldn't give a half-hearted reply. "I'll think about it and get back to you." Upon hearing my words, Valerie sat back down, saying, "All right. Mike, I know you hate overthinking stuff, but take some time tonight and really ponder about it." Even though Bob kept his eyes glued to the TV, his words hit me hard. That night, I went home and reflected on what they had said. I realized I had been living life without much purpose. It was the same with my previous job. I feel like I was just going for the motions, working out of habit. No real attachments or regrets. Even when it came to girls, I had an easy come, easy go attitude. What did I really want to do? I spread a notebook out on the table and began jotting down everything. Food I wanted to eat, books I wanted to read, things I wanted to do, and historic buildings I wanted to see all over the world. In no time, the pages were filled. I can't do all this, there's not enough time. I sighed, looking over the filled pages. Then suddenly burst into laughter. There were photo books of historical buildings on a shelf, which I hadn't paid much attention to. If I hadn't met those two, I might have spent my life simply sighing over the images in those books. After laughing heartily, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I'm quitting my part-time job today. The next morning, I announced this to Valerie and Bob right away. Bob, with a puzzled expression, remarked, "You're always so unpredictable." Yet I could tell he wasn't mad. "You figured out what you wanted?" Valerie asked, and I nodded confidently. "So, what's the plan?" "I'm going to see everything I've ever wanted to, until I'm satisfied." Valerie gave a delighted smile. "That sounds wonderful." I explained to them about my plan to visit historical sites around the world. Bob was concerned about the finances, but I had some savings from when I worked at a real estate agency. If I run out, I plan to pick up another part-time job. "Valerie, I'm sorry. I always teased you about taking responsibility. You don't really have to." I apologize Valerie for always teasing by telling her to take responsibility. I thought I should make sure to tell Valerie that she's now free. When I did, Valerie bit her bottom lip and looked up at me. She always makes that expression when she wants to convey something serious. "You don't have to apologize, please don't. Instead, I just want to ask one favor." That's what Valerie said to me. It was the first time she had ever asked me for a favor, so I was taken aback. "Hut, a favor? What is it?" I asked hesitantly, and with a serious look on her face, she said, "Is it okay if I wait for you, Mike?" I thought, what a sweet request. "Hey, Bob, can you step out for a bit? I want to hug Valerie." Bob retorted, "You know my answer is no. Don't push your luck. It seems touching her is off limits until I return." I feel the day I'll be calling Bob brother-in-law is getting closer. As proof, even though Bob verbally says no, he's still smiling. If God exists, I truly want to thank him. Thank you for leading me to the sibling that day. I've traveled for 3 years and have seen much of what the world has to offer. But there's still more I want to see. I've been documenting my travels on a blog. And in doing so, I started getting interview requests and offers to write essays and columns for travel magazines. Now, writing for them has become my job. The rapid change still astonishes me. To keep my promise, I opened the doors of the Tucker print shop. "I'm back, sorry for keeping you waiting." Upon my unexpected return, Valerie was in shock. When she realized, she gave a big smile and saluted me. "I've been waiting for you. Welcome back." She ran towards me and hugged me immediately, and of course, I hugged her back tightly. So, what did you think about the story? Subscribing to our channel will motivate us to create more content. Well then, see you in the next video. It's hard to believe that such things still happens these days. I thought vaguely about it in the narrow hallway of my apartment. There was a thick envelope on the small show box. Inside it was payoff money. I had a girlfriend. Her name was Michelle. She was the only daughter of the chairman of the Johnson General Hospital, one of the largest hospitals in town. Last night, I proposed to Michelle. And this is the result. Suddenly, Michelle's father showed up at my apartment and looked at me as if I were trash and said, "I won't let my daughter marry an uneducated loser." And then, saying it's payoff money, he left a thick envelope on the table. Michelle seems to have had her cell phone taken away by her father, so I can't get in touch with her. Just like that, my relationship with Michelle abruptly ended. My name is Rick, and I turned 32 this year. Currently, I'm the vice president of a gaming company I started with a friend. There were a lot of ups and downs to get here, but I believe everything has been a learning experience for me. Deep in my heart, there are things that I've yet to fully come to terms with. My father passed away when I was young, and my mother raised me on her own. Ever since middle school, I wanted to start working early. Being the eldest son, I have 3 younger sisters. When I told my mom that I have decided to quit high school and work while attending night school, she looked at me in guilt and bowed deeply to me. It wasn't that I loved studying, but telling her about the night school was more of an excuse to make her understand. I remember feeling humbled when she bowed so deeply. Together, my mom and I supported our family, ensuring my sisters could follow their desired paths. That gave me a lot of confidence. In the end, I kept working at a florist that I'd been part of since my part-time days. That's when I first met Michelle. I think I was 25 and she was 22. Every Monday and Thursday afternoon, she would come into the shop to buy fresh flowers. She never bought large bouquets. Just a few stems, and then she'd leave. We'd exchange a few words every time. Little by little, I found myself drawn to her shy and modest character. Michelle is the kind of girl you don't often see these days, with a quiet, reserved, and pure demeanor. Even someone as thick-skinned as me could immediately tell from the way she carried herself that she came from a good upbringing. On Valentine's Day, when she gave me chocolates, I realized for the first time that she had feelings for me. I asked her out right then and there. Our relationship was smooth sailing, never had an argument. Life was hectic for me. Being invited to co-found a business by a friend might have been a contributing factor. The only time Michelle and I could really meet was on Sundays. With my sisters still in school and tuition fees to pay, I didn't have a lot of money for myself. Our dates were mostly in the park. Every time, Michelle would bring along homemade lunch, and we'd idly spend our time in the park. I loved that. After dating for a year, I mustered up the courage to propose to her. I felt that if Michelle stays by my side for the rest of my life, I could push myself many times harder. I couldn't afford a ring worth 3 months of my salary and got her a cheaper one, but Michelle cried tears of joy after she saw it. She kept repeating, "Thank you." I swore I'd make her happy, but by the next morning, I felt like I'd been thrown into hell. The last time I saw Michelle, she had a tear-streaked face from crying with happiness. Our time together ended right there. Starting today, we have a few new recruits coming in. I was approached by HR as soon as I arrived at the office. The company had grown unimaginably since its inception, with almost 30 employees. After my heartbreak, I got seriously involved in a startup with a friend. He founded a gaming company. I've always loved games, and after seeing a game I created, he approached me to co-found the company. I dedicated myself to this job. The company grew rapidly in no time. Now, we're focusing on nurturing esports talents. My current job involves scouting esports players. It's quite a fulfilling job. Many young folks aspire to be professional esports players, but taking that first step can be challenging. I believe it's because its recognition in society is still somewhat limited. When job prospects come up, I bet very few parents would understand if their child says, "I want to be a pro gamer." Many kids are already making money by streaming games, but few share that with their parents. Streamers who make a living off game streaming need to put in the effort to make others understand their line of work. I support those kids who feel stuck because those around them don't understand what they're passionate about. I believe my job is to back their dreams. The recruits coming in today are between 18 and 26 years old. We plan to hire them as professionals. Among them, there's one guy I see as a key player. His name is Keith. He's a player who excels in multiplayer online battle arenas, MOBA. Simply put, MOBA is a game style where you team up and cooperate with allies to attack and conquer the enemy's base. It requires both strategy and the ability to make split-second decisions. I felt Keith had an exceptional talent. I'm Keith Johnson. It is a pleasure to meet you all. He's tall and good-looking. Although he seemed a bit rough around the edges, the way he responded and carried himself showed he came from a good upbringing, a good young man. The women in the office were clearly impressed by him. After a brief greeting, Keith started handling insurance paperwork and other administrative tasks in the HR department. It's a busy day since there are other new hires, and each needs to be directed to their respective departments. That's when I overheard a surprised voice from one of the female clerks. My feet stopped dead in their tracks when the clerk says, "He's the son of the Johnson General Hospital chairman, you know." Johnson General Hospital is the home of a girl I can't forget, Michelle. I remember Michelle mentioning that she's an only daughter with one younger brother who doesn't have the inclination or aptitude for medical studies. Now I understand why Michelle's dad told me. Her future husband has to be a doctor. It might be pointless to think about it now, but if Keith had gone to mid-school and become a doctor, maybe Michelle and I could have gotten married. I was called an uneducated trash. The opposition to our marriage wasn't just because of inheritance issues. I admit that I had my own shortcomings. Yet, I couldn't help but wonder, what if Keith had become a doctor? A fact I never realized when I first scouted Keith. Would I have recruited him if I'd known he was Michelle's brother? Mixing personal feelings with business is downright unacceptable. I kept reminding myself of that. Otherwise, I couldn't imagine supporting Keith's dream. Keith, as I thought, immediately became a vital member of our team. At the welcome party, he introduced himself, saying he was the son of a hospital chairman but couldn't give up his dream, so he left. Everyone gave him a warm applause for his determination. I clapped along, but something still felt off deep down. "You don't go home. You live alone, right?" I casually inquired about his personal life during the party. "I've cut ties with my family. When I said I didn't want to become a doctor, they disowned me. I think my sister will have to marry someone taking over the hospital." Keith mumbled. "I do feel a bit guilty about my sister." Watching him, I felt a burning anger rise within me. "Must be tough for your sister, all because you decided to be selfish. She's taking all the heat because of you, isn't she?" Even I thought it was a mean thing to say. At that moment, I couldn't control my emotions. I harshly lashed out at a man almost a decade younger than me. Keith flinched slightly but firmly said, "I don't regret it. I know my dream might have come at someone else's expense, but I can't give up." The thought of giving up never even crossed my mind. That's the determination I bring here. Keith spoke of his determination. I wished I could blame him for distorting the future Michelle and I could have had. Such pettiness made me ashamed of myself. Still, the unresolved feelings continued to smolder within me. In esports, Maintaining concentration amidst high tension is crucial. Especially in the game Keith plays, this is essential. It's the same even in regular practice matches. There's constant competition within the team. No different from any other sport. Only the best among the team get to play in matches. Those who can't produce results get phased out. That's the world of professionals. Many push themselves too hard and get sick. It's our job to guide them so that doesn't happen. Keith has a touch of genius, but he never forgets to work hard. I deeply wanted to support him, but I felt ashamed of my inability to do so. Then the incident happened. It was Keith's official debut match. A big tournament with a large number of participating teams. It was a knockout format. Keith's team kept on winning. With the lights dimmed in the venue, a large monitor lit up. Players sat in front of computers, engrossed in their game. Surrounded by a large audience, they had to keep their composure during the match. If they let the pressure get to them, they'd lose. Holding my breath, I closely watched Keith's character across the screen. Then, it seemed like Keith, seated in his chair, tilted his head slightly. The next moment, with a crashing sound, Keith fell from his chair to the ground. On the screen, the character controlled by Keith stood still as the opposing team attacked. "Are you okay, Keith?" I rushed over to find Keith gasping for breath on the floor. An ambulance was immediately called. When it arrived, I ended up riding with him. The paramedic told me, "We're heading to the Johnson General Hospital's emergency room," and I was a bit surprised. It seems there's a mysterious connection between the Johnsons and me. I tried to avoid it, but it felt like I was drawing this fate closer. I felt uneasy. When he was brought into the emergency room, I waited outside the treatment room. Suddenly, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching down the hallway. I didn't want to assume, but I couldn't help but feel tense. My suspicions were confirmed. It was Michelle, now grown into a mature woman. She walked toward me with a pale face. She must have been taught not to run in the hospital corridors since she was a child. A frustrated frown creased her forehead. "You're from Keith's company, right? Where's Keith? How's Keith doing?" she said, looking at the treatment room's door, completely unaware of my presence. She was looking at the door and didn't notice me at all. She was clearly worried about her younger brother and seemed too preoccupied to notice anything else. I felt bad for Keith, but my heart raced more for Michelle. "He just went into treatment room," I managed to answer, and Michelle's slender shoulders shuddered. Then, with great force, she turned to me. Her wide eyes looked as if they could overflow with tears, staring deep into mine. "Is it, Rick?" Her voice trembled as she asked. I nodded confidently in response. "It's been a while. Who would have thought we'd meet like this?" Michelle looked like she was about to burst into tears any moment. I was frozen, not knowing what to do. The tension between us was broken by the nurse's invitation. "Please come in." Normally, only family would be allowed in. "Can I come in too? I'm really worried." When I asked Michelle, she gave a small nod in agreement. Keith was lying in bed with an IV drip. He looked much better, which was a bit relieving. "Doctor, how's he doing? Is he going to be okay?" Michelle, clutching the hem of my jacket, looked up with concern. I spoke up on her behalf, addressing the doctor. The doctor said, "He's overworked, probably pushed himself too hard. Lack of sleep, not eating right, gaming all night, I suppose." The decision was to keep him overnight for observation. We both felt relieved that it wasn't more serious. The patient himself, Keith, was soundly asleep. "I'll go grab some things he'll need for the overnight stay." Thinking Michelle should stay by Keith's side, I made the offer. Could you? Thank you so much. To reassure Michelle, I grinned and said, leave it to me. Seeing that, Michelle's face softened a little. That's when it happened. Suddenly, the treatment room door was flung open. The loud bang startled everyone inside, including the nurses. Keith, always causing trouble, entering with a loud shout, was Dr. Johnson in a white coat. He was Michelle and Keith's father. He was, without a doubt, my archenemy. And overworking, after all that talk and leaving the house like that, should have listened to me and become a doctor. He grabbed Keith's collar and started shaking him. The nurses rushed to intervene. This isn't how a doctor should behave towards a patient. A nurse trying to intervene got shoved to the ground. Dr. Johnson raising his hand to strike Keith and shouted, "Wake up!" Without thinking, I grabbed his arm. "Stay out of it. This is a family matter." The annoyed doctor started yelling at me. I had no intention of letting go. With all due respect, that doesn't look like a family matter to me. Keith is one of our best. I'd appreciate if you refrain from violence. Hearing that, Dr. Johnson looked at me. Immediately, his eyes widened and his mouth twisted in shock. It seemed that he finally recognized who I was. "You dared to deceive my daughter, and now my precious son too, you uneducated piece of trash." The doctor's words ignited memories of my past anger. But I'm not the same person I was back then. I won't be shaken by such remarks. As the doctor and I locked eyes, Keith woke up. "Wait, Dad, Sistu, wasn't I in the middle of a game?" Struggling to grasp the situation, Keith's confusion was evident. I gently embraced him, explaining that he had collapsed and was brought to the hospital. "Keith, get back home now. I can still get you into a decent medical school. You wouldn't go wrong if you just listened to me." The doctor's harsh rebuke made Keith bite his lip. Always being dictated and controlled like this. That's probably why he ran away, I thought. Keith's an adult now. He makes his own decisions. Your children have grown beyond your reach. I positioned myself between Keith and the doctor, shielding both Michelle and Keith. The doctor, face filled with anger, grabbed at my collar. "You seem rather bold now. You can't hide that you quickly bailed out on my daughter with that payoff money." Michelle gasped and said, "What?" from behind me. "That money was returned to you ages ago." I replied with a provocative smirk. The doctor shouted, "You're lying. Dad, aren't you familiar with Rick's company? They've been generously donating every year." Keith's voice reflected his growing impatience. What are you talking about? Donations? Every year? You can't be serious." I brushed off the doctor's hand, presenting my business card once again. Recognizing the company name, the doctor's confidence wavered. "I donated that money immediately. Why would I keep it? I always intended to come back for Michelle one day." I spilled out the promise I'd held deep in my heart. The promise that always suppressing my feelings, deceiving even myself. But I can't do that anymore. My life has always been intertwined with Michelle's. Today, our unexpected reunion made those feelings come flooding back. I've been making donations to Johnson General Hospital under my company name. Initially, it was just to repay that payoff money. The continuous donations were because I couldn't let go of my connection with Michelle. Maybe I was testing my own resolve. For a private clinic, donations are a lifeline. Staring intently at my card, the doctor suddenly changed his demeanor. "If only you'd said so. My apologies for the misunderstanding. We're always grateful for your support. Please keep it coming." His demeanor had shifted completely. He seemed nonchalant but was oddly ingratiating. He's probably afraid I'd get upset and stop the donations. Well, I'll leave the rest to you. With that, he made a hasty exit, leaving us all dumbfounded. The rest of us were just left in shock. Both the attending physician and the nurses had surprised looks on their faces due to the sudden change in the doctor's behavior. "Well then, Keith, you will be admitted for the night. Remember, managing one's health is part of a professional's job. Be more cautious from now on." "I'm sorry. I will be more careful. Rick, thank you so much for standing up to my father so firmly. I was truly moved." "Thank you," Keith exclaimed with joy. I felt somewhat embarrassed. Receiving praise head-on is something I never really got used to. Michelle chuckled as she watched my reaction. "Listen, Michelle, it's super late, and you might be fed up waiting, but if you're still single," I mustered up the courage to tell her that. Before I could finish, Michelle interrupted. "I am single. I haven't gotten married. I couldn't forget about you after you suddenly disappeared." The earnest look in her eyes left me speechless. After I had vanished, Michelle had confronted my father. She heard what had transpired, what my father had done, and felt devastated. But she laughed, saying she never thought she wouldn't see me again. I always felt that our paths would cross again. I knew it in my heart. Michelle said she had been looking forward to that day. Tears threatened to spill from my eyes. Thinking about her holding onto that tiny glimmer of hope every day after our separation made my heart ache. "I'll bring a much nicer ring next time." As I said this, scratching my head, Michelle shook hers. "I like that ring. You still have it, right?" Feeling like she saw right through me, I scratched my head and responded, "You got me. Of course, I still have it. The ring that was returned to me as if to sever our ties. I want that ring on my finger again." I nodded firmly in response to Michelle's words. At that moment, the entire treatment room erupted into applause. The doctor, nurses, and Keith all clapped their hands, saying, "Good for you," as a gesture of celebration. Suddenly, I snapped back to reality. Right, Michelle and I weren't alone. Feeling embarrassed, I hastily left the treatment room. A few days later, Michelle and I both went to meet the doctor. At first, the doctor refused to see us, but Michelle's tears eventually won him over. "All right, I'll approve the marriage, but on one condition." The head doctor's condition was to forget about the old words he said, which was amusing. It's probably about that comment he made about me being an uneducated trash. I quickly replied, "Of course." I wanted to register our marriage right away, but due to work, it kept getting postponed. The one who ran out of patience was Michelle, and unusually, she puffed up her cheeks, raising her voice in protest at me. She hardly ever gets angry. She hesitated a bit and then complained in a soft voice, "Please, don't keep me waiting any longer." Seeing Michelle, blushing and speaking shyly, I realized how long I'd kept her waiting. I'll do it right away." I stood up and left my work. I grabbed her hand and rushed to the county clerk's evening counter. Michelle said, "Wait," but I had no intention of waiting any longer. Our pace quickened, and by the time the county building was in sight, we were both running. Held our hands tightly. I swore in my heart I would never let go of this hand for the rest of my life.